The space station called Harmony Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was old, built by species who had traveled the cosmos when humans still lived in caves. The station was beautiful in its own way, with curved walls and soft lights that made visitors feel calm and safe. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had met here to discuss trade, peace, and the future of civilization. Today, the station burned. Counselor pressed his forearms against the cracked window and watched another ship explode in the distance. His compound eyes could see in many directions at once, but everywhere he looked, there was death. The hollow swarm had come without warning. They emerged from the empty space between galaxies, millions of living ships that consumed everything in their path. "How many did we lose?" asked. His voice came out as a series of clicks that the translation device turned into words. 60% of the combined fleet," answered a small furry creature beside him. "The swarm adapts too quickly. Our weapons become useless within hours." Closed his eyes. 60%. Thousands of ships. Millions of soldiers from 12 different species, gone in 3 days. The Galactic Council had always believed they were safe. They had technology. They had numbers. They had peace treaties that spanned 100,000 star systems. But the swarm did not care about treaties. The swarm only wanted to feed. "There must be someone who can help," said. "We have contacted everyone. The outer colonies are evacuating. The inner worlds are preparing defenses, but we both know the truth." The furry creature's voice dropped to a whisper. "We are going to die." Turned away from the window. He walked through the damaged corridors of Harmony Prime, past wounded soldiers and crying refugees. His mind kept returning to one thought, one possibility that he had always rejected. The humans. Earth was a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. The Council had watched it for thousands of years, studying the strange creatures that lived there. Humans were fascinating in the worst possible way. They fought constantly. They killed each other over land, over ideas, over nothing at all. They built weapons that could destroy their entire world and came close to using them many times. 3 times humanity had applied for membership in the Galactic Council. 3 times they were rejected. "Too violent," the Council said. "Too dangerous. They would bring war to our peaceful civilization." Now war had come anyway. Entered the communication center. Dozens of operators sat at their stations, sending desperate messages to anyone who might listen. Most of the messages went unanswered. The species that could help were already fighting for their own survival. "Open a channel," said. "All frequencies, including the restricted ones." The operator looked at him with confusion. "Counselor, the restricted frequencies include." "I know what they include. Do it." The operator hesitated, then pressed the controls. A moment later, the channel was open, took a deep breath and spoke. "This is Counselor of the Galactic Council. We are under attack by a force we cannot defeat. Our fleets are destroyed. Our worlds are burning. If anyone can hear this message, we need help. We need warriors. We need—" He paused, swallowing his pride. "We need anyone who can fight." The message traveled through space at faster-than-light speeds. It bounced off relay stations and communication satellites. It reached the edges of known space and kept going. And on a military base orbiting Earth's moon, someone was listening. Admiral Park sat in his office, reading reports about fleet exercises. He was 57 years old, with gray hair cut short and a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin. The scar was a reminder of the last war, when humanity almost destroyed itself. Park had been a young soldier then, fighting in the ruins of cities he could no longer remember. That war ended 30 years ago. Humanity had survived, barely. They rebuilt their civilization and reached for the stars, only to find that the galaxy wanted nothing to do with them. "Too violent," the aliens had said, "too dangerous." Park still remembered the rejection. He remembered the anger, the shame, the feeling that humanity would always be alone in the universe. Now, as he listened to the alien's desperate voice, he felt something else entirely. "Sir," his communications officer said, "this message is on the Council's emergency frequency. They've never contacted us directly before." Park leaned back in his chair. "Play it again." He listened to Counselor's words once more. The fear in the alien's voice was clear, even through the translation. Park had heard that kind of fear before, from soldiers who knew they were going to die. "Contact the Defense Council," Park said. "Tell them we need to meet immediately." 2 hours later, Park stood before the leaders of Earth's military. Admirals, generals, and politicians filled the room. Holographic displays showed the current state of human forces: 400 warships, 2 million soldiers, and weapons that the galaxy considered barbaric. "The Galactic Council rejected us 3 times, said one of the politicians. "They called us savages. They said we were not worthy of joining their civilization. Now they want our help." "People are dying," Park said simply. "Billions of them. People we don't know, species that look down on us." Park nodded. "Yes, but that doesn't change what we are." He touched a control and the display changed. Now it showed Earth's history, the wars, the plagues, the disasters that humanity had survived. It showed the last war, when nuclear fire burned across continents and nearly ended everything. "We almost destroyed ourselves," Park said. "We came so close, but we survived. We learned. We decided that we would never let anyone face extinction alone." He looked at each person in the room. "The Council was right about us. We are violent. We are dangerous. We are the monsters they always feared." His voice hardened. "But we are also the only ones who can save them." The room was silent. Finally, the chairman of the Defense Council spoke. "Admiral Park, you are asking us to send our fleet into a war that is not ours, against an enemy we don't understand, to save species that hate us." "Yes, sir, that is exactly what I am asking." The chairman looked at the other leaders. Then he looked at Park. "The vote is unanimous. Admiral Park, you will take the first expeditionary fleet to answer the distress call. Show the galaxy what humanity can do." Park saluted. "With pleasure, sir." 3 days later, the fleet was ready. Park stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as 400 warships powered up their engines. Each ship was built for war, covered in armor and bristling with weapons. They were not elegant like alien vessels. They were brutal, honest, and terrifying. "All ships report ready," said Captain through the communication system. She commanded the destroyer Soul's Vengeance, one of the fastest ships in the fleet. Park nodded. "Then let's go answer that call. All ships engage faster than light drives." The stars stretched into lines. The fleet vanished from Earth's solar system. The monsters were coming to save the galaxy. Space ripped open like a wound, and Earth's fleet poured through. Lieutenant stood at his weapons station aboard his hands trembling slightly on the controls. He was 24 years old, fresh from the academy, and this was his first real deployment. The training simulations had not prepared him for the reality of faster-than-light travel, the way his stomach turned, and his vision blurred as the ship tore through the fabric of space itself. "Transition complete," announced the navigation officer. "All ships accounted for." Looked at the main display and felt his breath catch. They had arrived at the edge of Council territory, a region of space filled with beautiful stations and elegant ships. But something was wrong. Many of those stations were dark, their lights extinguished. Debris floated everywhere, the remains of vessels that had been torn apart. "My God," someone whispered. Admiral Park stood at the center of the bridge, his face showing no emotion. "Report." "I'm detecting over 200 alien vessels, sir. Most are civilian transports. They appear to be refugees." Park nodded slowly. "And the enemy?" "Long-range sensors show a massive force approximately 3 days away. They're moving toward the system. Sir, there are refugee stations there. Over 3 billion people. Felt cold. 3 billion. He could not even imagine a number that large. On Earth, the total population was only 8 billion. These aliens were about to lose nearly half of that. Open a channel to the alien fleet, Park ordered. Let them know we're here. The communication officer worked the controls. A moment later, a familiar clicking voice came through the speakers. Counselor appeared on the display, his compound eyes wide with what assumed was shock. You came, said. You actually came. You sent a distress call, Park replied. We answered. But we rejected you. We called you dangerous. We said you were not civilized enough to join us. Park's expression remained calm. You were right. We are dangerous. That's why we're here. He turned to his tactical officer. Show the counselor what we brought. The display changed to show the human fleet in full. 400 warships hung in space, their dark hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Unlike the smooth, curved shapes of alien vessels, human ships were angular and aggressive. Gun turrets covered every surface. Missile tubes lined their sides. Their engines burned like small suns. Made a sound that the translator could not process. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was awe. What are those weapons? He asked. Antimatter torpedoes, Park said. Nuclear-pumped lasers. Kinetic accelerators that can launch projectiles at 90% of light speed. Gamma-ray emitters. And a few surprises we prefer to keep secret. He leaned forward. Counselor, you spent 10,000 years building a civilization based on peace. We spent the same time learning how to kill each other more efficiently. Today, that experience is going to save your people. Chief Engineer O watched the exchange from her station in this engine room. She was 52 years old, with graying hair tied back in a practical knot, and hands covered in burned scars from decades of working with dangerous machinery. Had served on starships since she was 18. She had seen humanity reach the stars, get rejected by the galaxy, and build a fleet anyway. The aliens are scared, said one of her young engineers. Did you see that bug's face? Grunted, they should be scared. Have you seen what we're going up against? She pulled up the sensor data on her personal display. The hollow swarm, creatures that combined living tissue with technology. They did not just kill their enemies. They consumed them, breaking down organic matter and metal alike, absorbing everything into their own bodies. Each creature they ate made them stronger. 10,000 ships, muttered. Each one the size of a small moon, and that's just what our sensors can detect. Can we win? The young engineer asked. Thought about lying. She thought about giving the boy false hope, telling him that everything would be fine. But she had never been good at lying. I don't know, she said, but we're going to fight anyway. That's what we do. On the bridge, Admiral Park was coordinating with the remnants of the Council fleet. Most of their ships were damaged, their crews exhausted and terrified. Many had never seen real combat before. The Galactic Council had enjoyed peace for so long that they had forgotten what war actually looked like. Your ships will stay back and protect the refugees, Park told. My fleet will engage the enemy directly. Directly? His voice rose. Admiral, there are thousands of enemy vessels. Even with your weapons, you cannot attack them head-on. Watch us. Captain's voice came through the communication system. Admiral, permission to speak freely. Granted. The aliens think we're crazy. They're probably right, but I've run the numbers. If we use hit-and-run tactics, we might last a week, maybe two. Eventually, the swarm will overwhelm us. Her voice hardened. But if we hit them hard and fast, right in the center of their formation, we can break their coordination. They communicate through some kind of neural network. Destroy enough of their command ships and the rest will fall apart. Park smiled slightly. I knew there was a reason I brought you along, Captain. I live to serve, sir. Also, I really want to shoot something. The meeting ended and the fleet began moving. Watched the stars slide past on the main display, each one a sun with planets of its own. Somewhere out there, billions of people were waiting to die. They did not know that help was coming. They did not know that the monsters of Earth had decided to save them. Commander Shin entered the bridge, his massive frame filling the doorway. He was the leader of the Marine boarding squads, soldiers trained to fight in the worst conditions imaginable. Rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. "Admiral," he said, "my teams are ready. When do we deploy?" "Soon," Park replied. "The swarm ships have neural clusters at their cores. If we can get Marines inside, they can disable the ships from within." "Inside," said before he could stop himself, "we're going to board those things." Looked at him. The commander's eyes were cold, empty of fear. "That's what we do, Lieutenant. We go where others can't. We fight what others won't." Swallowed hard. He had trained for space combat, not for boarding enemy vessels. The thought of entering one of those nightmares made his stomach turn. But he was a soldier of Earth. This was what he had signed up for. "3 days until we reach the system," Park announced. "I want every ship at full combat readiness, every weapon loaded, every soldier prepared." He looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of each officer. "The galaxy called us monsters. They weren't wrong, but there's something out there that's worse than us. And we're going to show it what happens when you threaten the people we've decided to protect." The fleet moved through the darkness of space, 400 ships carrying the hope of a galaxy that had once rejected them. Behind them, the surviving aliens watched with a mixture of terror and wonder. They had called for help. The monsters had answered. Now all they could do was pray that the monsters were on their side. Private pressed her face against the transport ship's window and watched the horror unfold below. Refugee stations drifted in orbit around a blue gas giant, each one packed with millions of terrified civilians. And surrounding them like wolves around sheep were the ships of the hollow swarm. Was 19 years old. She had joined the military to pay for her mother's medical treatment back on Earth. She had expected to spend her service doing routine patrols and training exercises. She had not expected this. "First time seeing the enemy?" asked the soldier beside her. Nodded, she could not find words. The swarm ships were massive, each one larger than any human vessel. They looked alive, their surfaces covered in something that resembled skin stretched over bone. Thousands of smaller creatures swarmed around them, fighters no bigger than a car but armed with weapons that could cut through steel. "They're beautiful in a way," the soldier continued, "like something from a nightmare, perfectly designed to kill." "How are we supposed to fight that?" whispered. "The same way we fight everything. We hit it until it stops moving." The transport shuddered as it docked with the followed her squad through the airlock and into the warship's corridors. Soldiers ran in every direction, preparing for battle. The air smelled of sweat and machine oil and fear. Commander Shin stood at the entrance to the Marine Bay, his arms crossed over his massive chest. "Listen up. In 30 minutes we're going to attack the largest swarm ship in this system. Our job is to board it, find its neural cluster, and destroy it. Any questions?" No one spoke. What was there to say? Nodded. "Good, gear up." Put on her combat suit, a heavy piece of armor designed to protect against radiation, vacuum, and enemy fire. It made her feel like she was wearing a small tank. The helmet sealed around her head, and suddenly she was breathing recycled air. "This is real," she thought. "I'm actually going to fight." On the bridge, Admiral Park watched the tactical display with cold calculation. The swarm had arranged itself in a defensive formation around the refugee stations, clearly expecting a cautious approach. Most species would try to evacuate the civilians first, avoiding direct confrontation. Humans were not most species. "All ships prepare to attack," Park ordered. "We're going straight through the center." Captain's voice came through the communication system, filled with dark amusement. "The aliens are sending panicked messages, sir. They think we've lost our minds." "Let them think what they want. Just make sure the Soul's vengeance is ready to lead the assault. Always, Admiral. My crew was born ready. Park opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Park. In a few minutes we will engage the enemy. I'm not going to lie to you. Many of us will die today. Many of us will not see our homes again. He paused. But we are not fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every person on those stations. We are fighting for every species that called us monsters and then begged for our help. We are fighting because that is what humans do. He straightened his shoulders. All ships attack. The fleet surged forward. Lieutenant gripped his weapon's console as they accelerated toward the enemy. His targeting computer locked onto the nearest swarm ship, a massive creature covered in biological armor. Weapons free, called the tactical officer. Fire at will. Press the trigger. The shuddered as missiles launched from its tubes. Antimatter warheads streaked through space, leaving trails of light behind them. They struck the swarm ship's hull and detonated, tearing holes in the creature's flesh. It was only the beginning. All around him, the human fleet unleashed weapons that the galaxy had never seen. Nuclear-pumped lasers cut through enemy fighters like knives through paper. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to near-light speed punched through armor that could withstand conventional weapons. Gamma-ray bursts fried electronic systems and killed crews without damaging the ships themselves. The swarm fought back, watched as human vessels were struck by enemy fire, their hulls cracking open and spilling atmosphere into space. He saw escape pods launch, only to be hunted down by swarm fighters. He saw a destroyer rammed by a massive, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire. He kept shooting. Target destroyed, his computer announced, acquiring new target. Stomach heaved. He turned away from his station and vomited on the floor. A moment later, he wiped his mouth and returned to his console. "Lieutenant, are you okay?" asked the officer beside him. "No," said, "but I'm still fighting." Drone Commander I am sat in her control chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the positions of her autonomous fighters. She had 300 drones under her command, small unmanned ships that could perform maneuvers no human pilot could survive. "My children," she murmured, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Go hunt." The drones swarmed toward the enemy, their weapons firing in perfect coordination. Watched through their cameras as they tore through swarm fighters, dodged enemy fire, and sacrificed themselves to protect human pilots. Each time a drone was destroyed, she felt a small pain in her chest. They were just machines, she knew that, but she had programmed them, trained them, watched them grow from simple software into something almost alive. "For Earth," she whispered as another drone died. "For everyone." In the marine transport, Private felt the ship shake as it approached the largest swarm vessel. Through the tiny window, she could see the creature's surface growing larger and larger. It was like flying toward a living mountain. "Impact in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. "Brace yourselves." Grabbed the handles above her seat and held on. Around her, the other Marines did the same. Some were praying, some were cursing. One was laughing, a high, crazy sound that made one to scream. The transport struck the swarm ship's hull and punched through. Metal screamed against biological armor. The lights flickered. Someone was thrown from their seat and hit the wall with a sickening crack. Then the doors opened, and Commander Shin's voice filled her helmet. "Move, move, move." Ran. The interior of the swarm ship was a nightmare. Walls of flesh pulsed with strange light. The floor was soft and wet, covered in something that might have been blood. Corridors branched off in every direction, each one leading deeper into the creature's body. Enemy fighters appeared from the darkness, smaller versions of the ships outside. They had too many limbs and mouths full of metal teeth. They screamed as they attacked. Raised her rifle and fired. The weapon kicked against her shoulder. Plasma bolts struck the nearest creature, burning through its flesh. It fell and another took its place. Shot that one too, and the next, and the next. Beside her, her squad leader took a claw through the chest. He looked down at the wound with surprise, then collapsed, stood over his body and kept shooting. Shouted another Marine, "We need to move, the neural cluster is ahead." Grabbed her squad leader's ammunition and ran. She did not look back. The battle raged for 3 hours. When it finally ended, 30 human ships had been destroyed. Thousands of soldiers were dead, but the swarm's formation was broken. Their command ships were burning. Their fighters were scattered and confused. Admiral Park looked at the tactical display and allowed himself a small smile. "First engagement complete," he announced. "All surviving ships report status." The reports came in one by one. Damage reports, casualty lists, names of the dead scrolling across his display. Park read every name. He would remember them all. Counselor's voice came through the communication system. "Admiral, I don't understand. Your ships charged directly into the enemy. Your soldiers boarded their vessels. You fought like monsters," Park suggested. "Like you expected to die." Park nodded slowly. "We did expect to die, Counselor. That's the difference between us and you. You fight to survive, we fight to win." He turned back to the tactical display. "Now let's talk about our next move. The enemy won't stay confused forever." Behind him, the refugee stations began evacuating. 3 billion lives, saved by the monsters who came when no one else would. It was only the beginning. The medical bay of the smelled like blood and antiseptic. Chief Engineer O sat beside a bed, holding the hand of a young engineer who had worked under her for 3 years. His name was, and he was 26 years old. He had been caught in a reactor breach during the last battle, exposed to enough radiation to kill him 10 times over. "I'm sorry," whispered. His skin was pale, his eyes unfocused. "I tried to seal the leak, but it was too fast." "You saved the ship," said. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled. "You saved everyone aboard." "Is that true?" "Yes, the Admiral himself said so." Smiled weakly. "That's good, that's really good." His eyes closed. "Tell my mother, tell her I was brave." "I will." He died holding her hand, sat with him for a long time, then gently released his fingers and stood. There were other engineers who needed her, other systems that needed repair, other lives that depended on her keeping the ship running. She had cried for the first few deaths years ago. Now she just felt empty. The war had been going for 1 week. The human fleet had won battle after battle, pushing the swarm back from the refugee stations and destroying thousands of enemy ships. But victory came at a terrible price. Of the 400 ships that had left Earth, only 300 remained. The memorial walls in every vessel were filling with names. Admiral Park stood in his quarters, staring at a holographic image of his family, his wife, his 2 daughters. They had died 30 years ago during the last war, when a nuclear strike destroyed the city they lived in. Park had been stationed on the other side of the world. He had watched the mushroom cloud rise on his communication screen. The door chimed. "Come in," Park said. Captain entered. She was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her uniform wrinkled from days without sleep. But her voice was sharp as ever. "Admiral, we need to talk about our tactics." "What about them?" "They're too aggressive. We're losing ships faster than we can afford. If we continue at this rate, we'll be destroyed within a month." Park turned to face her. "And if we slow down, the swarm will adapt. They'll figure out our weapons. They'll learn how to counter us. We have to keep pressing the attack." "I know that, sir, but our crews are exhausted. Our ammunition is running low. Morale is," she hesitated. "People are starting to ask why we're fighting for aliens who hate us." "Do you ask that question, Captain?" Met his eyes. "No, sir, I know why we're here, but not everyone has the same conviction." Park walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the swarm was regrouping, preparing for another assault. And beyond them, the rift that had brought them into this galaxy continued to pour out more and more creatures. "Let me tell you a story," Park said. "When I was young, during the last war, I was stationed in a city called. The enemy was approaching and we knew we couldn't win. Our orders were to evacuate, to retreat and regroup. But there were civilians who couldn't escape. Old people, children, the sick." He was silent for a moment. "I disobeyed orders. I stayed behind with 50 volunteers. We held that city for 3 days while the evacuation completed. When relief finally arrived, only 12 of us were still alive." He turned back to, "I fought because those people needed someone to fight for them, not because they asked, not because they deserved it, because they needed it. And that's why we're here, because the aliens need us. Yes, and because the day we stop fighting for others is the day we lose what makes us human." Nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. I'll pass your words to the crew." She left and Park returned to his window. Outside, the stars kept burning, indifferent to the war being fought among them. Counselor requested permission to visit the. Park granted it, curious about what the alien wanted to say. The diplomat walked through the corridors of the human ship, his compound eyes taking in every detail. He saw wounded soldiers lying in hallways because the medical bay was full. He saw engineers working with bandaged hands and burned faces. He saw the memorial wall, names written in neat rows that stretched from floor to ceiling. "How many?" asked. 23,000 dead, Park replied, "so far." Was silent. In the Galactic Council's combined fleet, total casualties over 10,000 years of existence had not reached that number. The humans had lost more in 1 week than his people had lost in 100 generations. "Why?" finally asked. "Why do you sacrifice so much for species that rejected you?" Park led him to an observation deck overlooking the fleet. Ships moved in formation, their hulls from battle but still ready to fight. "Because someone has to," Park said. "Because we know what extinction looks like. We nearly destroyed ourselves, Counselor. We came so close to ending everything we had ever built, and when we survived, we made a choice." He faced the alien. "We decided that we would never let anyone else face annihilation alone, even those who fear us, even those who hate us, because that is what it means to be human." "I don't understand. Your species is so violent. You fought wars for thousands of years. You killed billions of your own kind." "Yes, we did, and every time we learned something. We learned that war is terrible. We learned that death is permanent. We learned that hate destroys everything it touches." Park's voice softened. "We also learned that sometimes fighting is the only way to protect the things that matter. The difference is knowing when to fight and what to fight for." Looked at the memorial wall again. So many names, so many lives ended. "I think," he said slowly, "that we were wrong about you. We called you monsters because you knew how to kill, but we never considered that you also knew how to die." "We know both," Park agreed, "and we're not afraid of either." The conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Lieutenant's voice came through the communication system, tight with urgency. "Admiral, our scouts have found something. The swarm's origin point. There's a dimensional rift in the Cygnus expanse. That's where they're coming from." Park and rushed to the bridge. The tactical display showed a section of space that seemed to be folded in on itself, a wound in reality that bled darkness and enemy ships. "If we destroy the rift," continued, "we can stop reinforcements. The swarm already in this galaxy will eventually die off without their connection to whatever lies beyond." "How many enemy ships guard the rift?" Park asked. His voice was grim. "Millions, sir, maybe more." Park studied the display. A direct assault would be suicide. The fleet could not survive against those numbers. But if they did nothing, the swarm would eventually overwhelm them anyway. And then the refugees they had saved would die. And then Earth itself would fall. "How long until we can reach the rift?" Park asked. 4 days at maximum speed." And our current fleet status: 312 ships combat ready, another 40 undergoing repairs. Park looked at. The aliens' compound eyes reflected the tactical display, thousands of enemy ships swimming in darkness. "Counselor," Park said, "I need you to take your surviving ships and escort the refugees to safety. Get them as far from the rift as possible." "And your fleet?" "We're going to close that rift." "Admiral, that's suicide." Park smiled and for the first time saw something in the human's eyes that he recognized. It was not madness. It was not desperation. It was peace. "Probably," Park agreed, "but we've faced worse odds, and we're very good at doing impossible things." He turned to the bridge crew. "Set course for the Cygnus Expanse. All hands prepare for the final engagement." The fleet began to move, 300 ships heading towards certain death. And the aliens they left behind watched in silence, finally understanding what it meant to be human. The Cygnus Expanse was the most terrifying place in the known galaxy. Lieutenant stared at the main display, his hands frozen on his weapons console. The dimensional rift hung in space like a wound that would not heal, a tear in reality that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Darkness poured from it, along with an endless stream of swarm ships. Millions of them, maybe billions. "Dear God," someone whispered. Admiral Park stood at the center of the bridge, his face calm. "All ships form attack pattern. We're going through." Felt his heart pounding. This was it, the final battle. They all knew there would be no retreat, no reinforcements, no rescue. They had come here to die. But they had also come here to win. "Admiral," said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded, "the crew is ready." Park nodded. "Good. Open a channel to the fleet." The communication officer pressed the controls. A moment later, Park's voice was broadcasting to every ship, every soldier, every soul who had followed him to the edge of oblivion. "This is Admiral Park. We have reached the end of our journey. Behind us are the people we swore to protect. Ahead of us is the enemy that threatens everything we love." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We were born on a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived ice ages, plagues, predators, and each other. We crawled out of our caves and reached for the stars. They called us monsters. They called us violent. They called us dangerous." His voice hardened. "They were right. Now let's show them why that's a good thing." The fleet surged forward. Private sat in a transport ship with 50 other Marines, waiting to board the largest swarm vessel guarding the rift. She was no longer the scared girl who had joined the military to pay for her mother's medical bills. She had seen too much death for that. Now she was something else, something harder. Commander Shin stood at the front of the transport, checking his weapons. "Our target is the neural cluster at the center of the ship. We fight our way in, plant the charges, and fight our way out. Any questions?" "Sir," said one of the Marines, "what if we can't get out?" Met his eyes. "Then we make sure the charges go off anyway." The Marine nodded. They all understood. This mission had never been about survival. The transport struck the swarm ship's hull and punched through. Was already running before the doors opened, her rifle raised, her finger on the trigger. The nightmare interior of the enemy vessel surrounded her, walls of flesh and bone, corridors that pulsed with alien life. Creatures emerged from the darkness, screaming and slashing, shot them down. More came, she kept shooting. Beside her, Marines fell. She stepped over their bodies and pressed forward. The neural cluster was ahead, nothing else mattered. On the bridge of the chaos reigned. Enemy fire struck the ship from every direction. Systems failed. Crew members died at their stations. The deck shook with continuous impacts. Fired his weapons until they overheated, then switched to secondary systems. When those failed, he pulled out his sidearm and shot at the enemy fighters through the cracked window of the bridge. It was pointless, he knew, but he could not stop fighting. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported the damage control officer. "We've lost Engine 2. Life support is failing in the lower sections." "Keep fighting," Park ordered. "We're almost there." The pushed through the enemy formation, taking damage that would have destroyed any other ship. Its armor held barely. Its weapons continued firing. Its crew refused to die. Then saw it. The Soul's Vengeance, Captain's destroyer, was breaking formation. It was heading directly for the rift. Admiral said, "Captain is breaking off." Park's eyes found the destroyer on the tactical display. For a long moment, he was silent. "She's carrying the singularity bomb," he said quietly. "She's going to close the rift herself." On the Soul's Vengeance, Captain sat alone on her bridge. Her crew had been evacuated to other ships. The destroyer was running on automatic, its engines pushed beyond their limits, its weapons firing to clear a path through the enemy. "Admiral," said through the communication system, "I'm sorry for not asking permission, but this was the only way." Park's voice was heavy. We both knew someone would have to do this. The bomb needs to be detonated inside the rift and the ship won't survive the journey. It has to be piloted manually." She smiled, though no one could see it. "I volunteered the moment I learned the plan. I just didn't tell anyone. There has to be another way." "There isn't, and we're running out of time." The destroyer was approaching the rift, enemy fire tearing at its hull. "Tell everyone I said goodbye, and tell the aliens. Tell them that humans don't just fight for themselves. We fight for everyone." The communication channel crackled. "Captain, this is Lieutenant. It's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine, Lieutenant. Take care of the Admiral. He's going to need help after this." The Soul's Vengeance entered the rift. For a moment, the ship was visible, a dark shape against the swirling darkness, then activated the singularity bomb. The explosion was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Space itself seemed to crack and shatter. The rift collapsed inward, folding in on itself until it was a point of infinite density. Then that point vanished, and there was nothing left but empty space. The swarm screamed. Every creature, every ship, every fighter suddenly lost its connection to whatever had controlled them. They began to drift, then to die. Without the rift, they could not heal, could not reproduce, could not coordinate. They were cut off from their source. And they were falling. Watched the enemy fleet disintegrate. Ships crashed into each other. Fighters flew in circles until their fuel ran out. The massive simply stopped moving, their systems shutting down one by one. "It worked," someone said. "My God, it actually worked." Park said nothing. He was staring at the empty space where the Soul's Vengeance had been. Inside the largest swarm ship, Private reached the neural cluster. It was a massive organic structure, pulsing with sickly light. Around her, the ship was dying, its walls softening, its systems failing. "Commander," she said into her radio, "I'm at the target, ready to plant charges." There was no response. Had died 10 minutes ago, holding off a wave of enemies so the rest of the squad could advance. Was alone. She set the charges anyway. Then she sat down beside the neural cluster and waited. She was out of ammunition. She was wounded in 3 places. She did not have the strength to make it back to the transport. "Hey," she said to the dying ship, "you killed a lot of good people, but we killed you first." The charges detonated, closed her eyes and thought of her mother. The Battle of the Cygnus Expanse ended 3 hours later. The surviving swarm ships were hunted down and destroyed. The rift remained closed, sealed forever by Captain's sacrifice. Of the 312 ships that had entered the battle, 127 survived. Over 50,000 humans had died. But the galaxy was saved. 1 month later, a memorial ceremony was held on Harmony Prime. Counselor stood before representatives of every species in the Galactic Council, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic images of the fallen. "We called them monsters," said. "We rejected them from our civilization. We said they were too violent, too dangerous, too primitive to join us." He paused. "We were wrong." He turned to Admiral Park, who stood among the surviving officers. "Admiral, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally invite humanity to join us as full members, not as a reward but as a recognition of what you truly are." Park stepped forward. His uniform was clean, his medals polished, but his eyes were tired. So many had died under his command, so many names on the memorial walls. "I'm honored, Counselor," Park said, "but I must decline." The chamber fell silent. "We didn't come here for a seat at your table. We didn't fight for recognition or rewards. We came because people were dying and we could help." Park looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each alien representative. "When you're ready to treat us as equals, not saviors, not monsters, just equals, come find us. We'll be waiting." He turned and walked out of the chamber. The surviving officers followed him. Outside, Lieutenant caught up with the Admiral. "Sir, are you sure about that? We could have joined them. We could have been part of the galactic community." Park smiled slightly. "We will be eventually, but not because we saved them, because they respect us." He looked up at the stars. "That's worth waiting for." 3 months later stood on the bridge of his own ship. He had been promoted to captain after the battle, given command of a rebuilt destroyer. His crew was young, eager, ready to explore the universe. "Sir," said his communications officer, "we're receiving a signal from deep space. It's faint, but it sounds like another distress call." Sat in his captain's chair. Somewhere out there, someone needed help. Someone was facing a threat they could not defeat alone. "Set course for the signal's origin," ordered. "Let's see who needs our help this time." The ship turned toward the unknown. And somewhere in the dark, something ancient stirred, drawn by the light of a species that refused to die. Humanity had announced itself to the universe. The universe was listening.